Thank you, Sheriff, for that introduction. And thanks to the Old Schoolhouse magazine for making this webinar possible. And welcome to all of you who are participating today. I would like to invite you to type in your questions as we go along. I won't be answering them until the end of our time, but you can type in your questions in the chat box on your screen, and I encourage you to do so, not waiting till the end. Now, as the title of this webinar indicates, we're going to focus on 3 keys to bringing meaning to life and to work. Now, let me clarify, when I use the word work, I'm referring to all kinds of work, whether it's done in the home or outside the home, and whether it's done for pay or not. Whether it's work in a kitchen, washing dishes, or work in a courthouse like clerking or judging. Now, bringing meaning to all kinds of work is really an important part of bringing meaning to life, because we spend the bulk of our waking hours working. All of us do, young and old. Now, I'll be addressing my comments in this webinar primarily to young people, age 13 and above, so I hope we have a group of them listening here today. But what I'll be sharing is just as applicable to parents and even to grandparents. Now, for young people, work involves things like mowing the lawn and caring for pets and all kinds of ordinary things. It also involves doing schoolwork, and every student knows what that's all about. Some of you might be working in the community, and this would apply as well to that. So whether your work is at home or outside the home, it's really a lost art that I feel needs to be restored to our culture. I'm a big believer in the idea that we don't find meaning in our work. We bring meaning to our work. And that's what we'll be focusing on in this webinar. I'll be sharing from a curriculum that we've produced here at Worldview Matters called God's Pleasure at Work. And I encourage you to go through the full course after the webinar, because it contains a lot more material than I can possibly cover in 1 hour. And I'll tell you more about the God's Pleasure at Work curriculum later on in our session. Now, before I get into the first key to bringing meaning to work, let me emphasize that work is not a curse. It may seem like a curse sometimes, but it was the ground that God cursed, not work itself. Of course, the curse makes our work more difficult, but work was God's idea before the fall. It's not a punishment. God instructed Adam to dress and keep the garden prior to the entrance of sin into the world. And God provided both physical and mental work for Adam, and he told him not only to dress and keep the garden, but to name the animals. So Adam was not only a botanist and a landscaper, but he was a zoologist as well. Now, humans were created in the image and likeness of God so that we could work in meaningful ways. A big question for a lot of people is, why am I working? Students often ask, why am I studying this? I know I did. By the way, studying is work that every student does a lot of, and I'm sure every student listening is well aware of that. But parents also see reasons for working as a way to pay the rent or a way to put bread on the table. But whether you're studying or whether you're working to pay the rent, is there more to it? Is there a greater purpose for the work itself? Does work have meaning beyond the need for certain things to get done? Does it have meaning beyond the next book report that's due, or you have to write something, or you have to do a project for some assignment? Now, sometimes when people talk or they write about fulfillment in work, you'll sometimes hear this question, what is your dream? Now, that's not a bad question, but I think there's a more foundational question, and that's this. What is God's dream? What did he have in mind when he made human beings in the first place? More specifically, what role did God have in mind for humans to fill when he created Adam and Eve in the very beginning? Well, we don't have to wonder about the answer to that question, because the Bible tells us plainly in the first chapter of the first book, Genesis, that the role that God had in mind for people is to govern over the material world. We read about it in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 28. It says, God said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness. And when it says us, of course, that's referring to the Trinity. Let us make man in our image and in our likeness, and let them rule. And if you look at carefully, it talks about ruling over fish and birds, but then it says over all the earth. And then later in chapter 2, it says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it. Well, biblical scholars call this portion of Scripture the cultural mandate. I call it the first commission, because here we have a commission for humans, right from the Maker. A commission to rule, a commission to govern or steward or manage all the material world, everything in it, not just the fish and the birds, but over all the earth. And that really covers a whole lot of ground, literally, and it involves a whole lot of jobs. Now, here's a picture of our son, our oldest son, Nathaniel, at work. His work actually does involve ruling over fish. He's a biologist. He works for a major power company here in the Pacific Northwest. And by the way, he could never do this work if he hadn't done his math homework as a student. But it's easy to see the connection between the work of a biologist and the first commission of Genesis 1. But when you think about it, there's not a job on this planet that does not involve ruling or governing over some aspect of God's creation. And that's because all the stuff on this planet is God's stuff. Psalm 24:1 says, the earth is the Lord's, and all its fullness, or all it contains, the world and those who dwell therein. Not only every fish, but every piece of paper, every computer keyboard, every bubble of soap suds. This is really awesome. Whether we're working with fish or working with a computer or even baking cookies, all the stuff we're handling and working with belongs to the Lord. And not only does it belong to him, but he is holding it all together, moment by moment. Colossians 1:16 and 17 says that, for by him, and if you look carefully at the context of this verse, you'll see that he's referring to Christ. By Christ, all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. He's talking about spiritual realities there. All things were created through him, through Christ, and for him. And he, Christ, is before all things, and in him all things consist. I like the way that the Amplified Bible translates that. It says, in him all things are held together. And this includes cookie dough and chocolate chips, everything. So it's pretty amazing to think that God is sustaining all of the material world moment by moment, from electricity to water to trees to sound waves. It's all his stuff. Now, human work involves the management or the governance of his stuff. This is what God had in mind when he created humans. And he commissioned us in the beginning to rule over it. So, this is the first key to bringing meaning to work of all kinds, whether it's for pay or not, whether it's at home or in the community, whether it's mowing the lawn or taking care of a pet or making your bed. Understand this, that all matter is God's stuff. And we were created and commissioned to rule over it, to manage it, to steward and govern it. Now that is really a profoundly important thought. This is a thought that shaped the course of Western history from the time of the Reformation right up to the 20th century particularly. Now, I hope you don't feel like you're being subjected to the Overman family videos, but here's a photo of our granddaughter, one of our granddaughters, Emily, washing dishes. Now, she's ruling and managing and governing over cups and plates and water and soap suds. It's all God's stuff. It's held together by Him, and it all belongs to Him. Emily is managing it. She's governing it, over it. She's ruling it. And there's something else really phenomenal taking place here that's very, very important. By washing dishes, Emily is benefiting people, namely her family members. Her family will have clean plates for a future meal. So washing dishes is not only a direct fulfillment of the first commission in Genesis to govern over matter, but it's also a very practical way to express authentic love and service to others. Now, washing dishes is a fulfillment of the Great Commandment. Now, we've got the first commission in Genesis, and then we've got the Great Commandment, which is in Luke 10, verse 27, where it says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength." That's mentally and emotionally and physically. "And you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Now, our neighbors are those closest to us. Well, this certainly applies to family members. So the second key to bringing meaning to work is this. Understand that work is a practical way to love God and to serve others. It's one way to fulfill that great commandment. Now, some work is a direct service and some work is an indirect service. When we wash dishes or we fix a leaky faucet under the sink, we're doing direct service to our family. But the people who manufactured the cups and the plates and the pipes and the people who designed and made the tools we use to fix those pipes, they provide an indirect service to the family. Now, to the degree that Emily is able to see her work as a fulfillment of the first commission of Genesis 1 and a practical way to love God and serve others, like we're told in Luke 10, she is really able to bring meaning to her work. Now, if Emily can look beyond the dishes to a much bigger picture, she can bring really extraordinary meaning to what most people think is a really mundane task. She can bring the kind of meaning to her everyday work that very few people in today's secularized culture know anything about. Now, here's a photo of our grandson, Rylan, mowing the lawn. He's ruling over grass. The lawn is God's stuff. And to the degree that Rylan is able to realize that his mowing of the lawn is a direct response to God's first commission to rule over the material world, and to the degree he's able to see that he is actively engaged in the great commandment to love God and people, he can bring extraordinary meaning to so-called ordinary work. Now, one of our other granddaughters, Victoria, loves to do pencil drawings. Is that work? Well, yeah. It takes a lot of mental energy to do what she does. And when she draws, Victoria rules over lines and pencil lead and paper. And in doing this, she's actually governing over God's stuff. She's shaping his raw creation into works of art. And I think God is pleased and delighted to have her do that. And when Victoria draws, she is engaged in the first commission of Genesis 1. And she's also serving other people because she's creating something of pleasure and inspiration for others to enjoy. Now, in light of all that I've said so far, I think we need to redefine the word work, because what I'm talking about here is not what typically comes to mind in most people's heads when they hear the word work. I'd like to define work worth doing, because not all work is worth doing. It takes a lot of work to rob a bank, but that's not work worth doing. Here's a definition of work worth doing. Work worth doing is any expenditure of energy, mental or physical, for pay or not, that rightly manages God's stuff and employs God-given abilities to benefit others, or prepares one to do so. Now that's a mouthful. It's worth repeating, so I'm going to say it again. Work worth doing is any expenditure of energy, mental or physical, for pay or not, that rightly manages God's stuff and employs God-given abilities to benefit others, or prepares one to do so. Now, I actually have this definition taped right above my computer screen on a 3x5 card. That's the computer is where I do most or a lot of my work. Now, this definition of work applies to all kinds of work, whether it's work in the kitchen or work in the courthouse or anywhere between. It brings meaning and purpose to the work of students, too, because students are preparing to manage God's stuff well and rightly in the future. Now, before I share the third key to bringing meaning to work, I want to play a little mind game with you. On your screen, you should see a small yellow square surrounded by black. My question for you is this: what's the meaning of this small yellow square? What are you looking at? Well, it's hard to say for sure, because I've blocked out most of the picture. We don't have enough of the picture to know for sure what that small piece really is. Maybe it's a sunset, or maybe it's a flower. You don't know. But if I show you the bigger picture, if I show you the larger frame of reference, so to speak, you will immediately comprehend the meaning of this smaller piece. So let's watch. Okay, it is a banana. Now, if I were to show you that small piece again, since you have that bigger picture in your mind, you know that that's a banana. Now, having the bigger picture in mind is really important when it comes to meaning. And what does this have to do with work? Well, here's what it has to do with work. When it comes to bringing meaning to work, having that bigger picture in mind is a real necessity. The bigger picture that I'm talking about is the bigger picture called a biblical worldview. A worldview is a larger frame of reference. It's a big picture that causes a person to see smaller pieces in certain ways. Now, every job we do is a small part of life, but it's part of a bigger picture, no matter what that job might be. So our challenge then as human beings and as followers of Christ is to see how that job connects with his bigger picture. That's why having a well-developed biblical worldview is really, really critical. Now, let me share with you a working definition of biblical worldview that will help get a handle on what I'm talking about. A biblical worldview is a big picture of reality based on beliefs about 5 things. Now remember, this is a working definition. The 5 things that shape a biblical worldview are beliefs about God, beliefs about creation, where did it come from, and what is it? Beliefs about humanity, who am I, and what gives me value, and those kinds of questions. Beliefs about moral order, and beliefs about purpose. Now, again, that's another big mouthful here, and we could spend quite a bit of time unpacking this, but I just want to give you that as a frame of reference for what I'm going to share with you next, because the third big key to bringing meaning to work is make intentional connections between your work and the bigger picture of a biblical world view. Now, this process really isn't as difficult as it might sound, and to keep this simple, I want to give you a tool that will help you to make intentional connections between any work that you do now or in the future and the bigger picture, God's bigger picture of a biblical worldview. But before I share this tool with you, I want to share a short video clip from the God's Pleasure at Work curriculum, a clip that provides a good example of someone who was able to bring meaning to his work by making intentional connections between his work and God's bigger picture, the bigger picture of a biblical worldview. I want to show you a video clip about a man named Dr. George Washington Carver, one of my heroes. Now, because we can't be sure that everyone watching this webinar has the bandwidth to view a streaming video online, what we're going to do is play the soundtrack of the video, and then I'm going to show you some still frame images that I took from the video and I just arranged in PowerPoint slides. If you want to see the actual video, I'll tell you how to do that later, but let's watch this clip right now.
George Washington Carver was born at about 1865, the son of slaves. His father was killed in a log hauling accident a few weeks after George was born. While still an infant, he was kidnapped, along with his mother and sister, by thieves wanting to make some money by selling them to another slave owner. Moses Carver, their current owner, sent someone after them with a good racehorse to buy them back. The kidnappers took the horse and left George lying on the ground, sick with whooping cough. His mother and sister were never heard from again. Carver's relationship with the Lord began early in life. He wrote, "I was just a mere boy when converted, hardly 10 years old. There isn't much of a story to it. God just came into my heart one afternoon while I was alone in the loft of our big barn, while I was shelling corn to carry to the mill to be ground to meal." Carver had a passion for learning. That passion led him to earn a degree in agriculture from Iowa State College as the first African-American student there. In Carver's day, the South was a one-crop economy, cotton. It was the only crop banks would lend money to farmers for planting. But the soil became depleted through repeated planting of cotton year after year. Carver knew that if the farmers planted legumes, like peanuts and sweet potatoes, it would revive the soil. But the only problem was, in those days, there was no market for peanuts and sweet potatoes. So Carver set out to create a market and invented 300 uses of the peanut and 118 uses of the sweet potato in his lab at Alabama's Tuskegee Institute. Booker T. Washington was the head of Tuskegee at the time. He invited Carver to come to his school when Carver was 31 years old. In his invitation, Washington wrote, "Our students are poor, often starving. We teach them to read and write, but words cannot fill stomachs. They need to learn how to plant and harvest crops. I cannot offer you money, position, or fame. These things I now ask you to give up. I offer you in their place work, hard work, the challenge of bringing people from degradation, poverty, and waste to full manhood." Carver's response was, "I shall be glad to cooperate with you in doing all that I can through Christ who strengtheneth me to better the condition of our people." And Carver did just that. He said, I took just a handful of peanuts and looked at them. Great Creator, I said, why did you make the peanut? Why? God answered his prayer. He said, the great Creator taught me to take the peanut apart and put it together again. And out of the process have come forth all these products. He called his lab God's Little Workshop. Included among the many products from the peanut, the sweet potato, and soybean are instant coffee, chili sauce, mayonnaise, molasses, meat tenderizer, shaving cream, wood stain, printer's ink, adhesives, axle grease, bleach, linoleum, and fuel briquettes. Carver gave God the credit. He said, no books ever go into my laboratory. I never have to grope for methods. The method is revealed the moment I am inspired to create something new. Without God to draw aside the curtain, I would be helpless. Dr. Carver locked the door to his lab when he was creating things. He said, only alone can I draw close enough to God to discover his secrets. In 1821, when speaking before the U.S. House Ways and Means Committee in Washington, D.C., he was asked, Dr. Carver, how did you learn all of these things? Carver answered, from an old book. What book? Asked the chairman. Carver replied, the Bible. The chairman inquired, does the Bible tell about peanuts? No, sir, Dr. Carver replied, but it tells about the God who made the peanut. I asked him to show me what to do with a peanut, and he did.
Well, Carver's biblical worldview can be discovered through his writings and his speeches. Let me give you 4 examples of some quotes that I discovered. Carver said, all my life I have risen regularly at 4 o'clock and I have gone into the woods and talked with God. There he gives me my orders for the day. I'm not suggesting that we all have to get up at 4 and do that, but that's what he did. He says, the secret of my success, simple. It's found in the Bible. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. He had a friend named Jim Hardwick, and he said to his friend, he said, man who needed a purpose, a mission in life to keep him alive had one. He could be God's co-worker. My purpose alone must be God's purpose. As I worked on projects which fulfilled a real human need, forces were through me, which amazed me. I would often go to sleep with an apparently insoluble problem, and when I awoke, the answer was there. And then he said to a pastor, he said, pray for me, please, that everything that is done will be done to his glory. I'm not interested in science or anything else that leaves God out of it. Now, Carver was intentional about making connections between his work and the bigger picture of a biblical worldview. My point here in this webinar is that you can also be intentional about it, and you can go through the same sort of thought process that I'm sure Carver went through, no matter what kind of work you're doing, both presently and in the future. Now, I'm going to teach you a way to be intentional about making those connections. Much like I think Carver did, the tool I want to give you today is called an awesome activator. That's what I call it. And at the end of this webinar, I'll share with you how you can get a free copy of this tool. But for now, just follow along, and I'll show you how this tool applies to the work that Carver did. The Awesome Activator is a 2-page document that walks you through a process whereby any work can be connected with God's bigger picture. Now, the first page is on your screen. The instructions are on the top, and in the lower part you can see a circle surrounded by a lot of white space, and in the circle what you do is you write the particular work that you want to connect with the bigger picture. Now, I'm going to walk through this as though I were George Washington Carver, which I am not, but I have read quite a bit about him, and I think that what I've done here is probably representative of how he would have done it. First, he would have written something in the center circle like this: helping Southern farmers to be successful. Now, this was the job description that he was given when he came to Tuskegee. Next, I think he would have written down connections between that endeavor and God's bigger picture. And I would have asked him to write those things down in the form of bubbles in the blank area around the activator. And here's what I imagine it would have looked like. He probably would have written this down: God created plants, and he intends for humans to rule over them. I think he also would have written something like this down: God shares his secrets with those who wait on him for direction. Here's another thing I think he would have written down: humans have a responsibility to govern over plants in ways that are resourceful and beneficial without waste or abuse. And one more I'm sure he would have said. Get my screen working here. There we go. He would have said, humans are the crown of God's creation and are to be loved in practical ways. Now, what we're doing here is we're creating a mind map of connections between Carver's work and the bigger picture that he lived by, the bigger picture that really gave his work extraordinary meaning and purpose. Now, the Awesome Activator has 2 pages to it, and on the back, or on the second page, there are a few questions that lead you, or in this case would have led Carver, into something active. The first question is: list some ways that you could apply these biblical truths to your endeavor. And I think Carver would have written something like this: I could co-work with God to create new products from peanuts and sweet potatoes and soybeans, products that are beneficial to humans. I think he would have written something like this down: I could generate new economic markets for these products. And I think he probably would have written down: I could demonstrate my love for farmers by teaching them how to rotate cotton crops with plants that will revive the soil, such as peanuts and soybeans. And then there's a second question on the second page of the Awesome Activator that goes like this: list some skills that you must develop, or some preparation that you have to make in order to succeed. And that's where you think about, well, are there some books I need to read, or is there some training I need to take, or some research? Well, I think Carver probably would have written something like this down: I must turn my attention to chemistry and add it to my knowledge of botany. You see, before he came to Tuskegee, he didn't have a lot of background in chemistry. But when he got a vision for his purpose there, he turned his attention to chemistry and added that to his knowledge of botany. Here's another thing I think he would have written down: I must continue to make prayer a regular part of my day, to hear God's secrets about plants and discover ways to make new products from them. There's no doubt that that went through his mind. Here's another thing I think he would have thought about in terms of his preparation and discipline. He said to himself, I must educate farmers about the importance of crop rotation. Those are all things that I'm sure went through his head. And then I'm sure he also figured that he had to do research to find new markets for products created from plants. I know that because that's what he actually did. So the final step on the page 2 of the Awesome Activator are the action steps. And here's what I think he probably would have written down: I will combine my knowledge of botany with chemistry in the laboratory. I will rise up early, ask God for directives daily. I will set aside time to be alone with God in his little workshop, listening to what he has to share with me about creating plants, or products from plants. And then I'm sure he decided to develop a school on wheels. I know he did. because he went actually out to farmers to teach them firsthand how to rotate crops successfully. And it's kind of funny because he would go out there with this little stool on wheels, and he was dressed in his farming clothes, and sometimes people didn't know who he was till he started teaching them. And then he also took a great action step here in establishing a center at Tuskegee Institute for the development of renewable resources from plants. And he contacted people like Henry Ford and urged Ford to use plastics from soybeans in his production of automobiles. Now, there you have it, the awesome activator. Now, we've created this thinking how Carver might have answered it, but I'd like to bring this down to where a lot of us live, both parents and kids, and that's in the area of washing dishes. So if we can get this down, I think we can get it down at almost any job. Let's go back to Emily here just for a minute. Here's Emily at the sink. So the question is, how does washing dishes connect with the bigger picture, God's bigger picture, the biblical worldview? Well, to use the awesome activator, you would write in washing dishes in the center circle on that first page. Now, your big challenge is to think of specific connections between washing dishes and the biblical worldview. You might be at a loss right now thinking, wow, I can't think of anything. Well, to help in this step, we want to give you another resource, and I'll tell you how to get this at the end. There's no charge for it. But this other resource is called 96 Biblical Worldview Premises or axioms or basic truths. These are 96 truths from Scripture that have been arranged according to truths about God, creation, humanity, moral order, and purpose. Those are the 5 elements of the biblical worldview. This document is a wonderful biblical worldview in a nutshell. It was developed by the Biblical Worldview Institute, which is a division of Cascade Christian Schools in Puyallup, Washington. Now, the way to use this document is to read through these 96 premises or truths and highlight the ones that have a particular connection with whatever work you're doing, in this case washing dishes. Now as you read through and we're not going to read through the 96 right now, but later on when you do this, circle any areas that connect to washing dishes and then use your mind map here. Now I've done this as one example of how it could be done. For example, I would connect this to washing dishes. I am to love my neighbor as myself. This includes my own family members. So we've already talked about that one. Here's another one. I've been given gifts and abilities by God for the purpose of blessing and serving others. Well, I can use those gifts and abilities washing dishes. Here's another one. The material world, including the dishes themselves and the water and the soap, the bubbles, it's all a realm that God has commissioned me to govern over. Here's another one. God wants His will to be done on earth, including dishes to be cleaned. I think that's God's will. And He works through people like me to accomplish it. Now remember, these statements are all taken from that list of 96 truths. Here's a couple more. I am to do all my work heartily as for the Lord. And one more, I am to love the Lord my God with all my strength. And it takes some strength to wash dishes, not a lot, but it does take some. Now, that's just how I did this, and you may come up with other connections, but I wanted to give you an idea of how this is done. Now, I know I'm introducing a huge topic here, and before I answer a few questions, let me give you the access information for the material that I've mentioned in this webinar. Oh, I see I forgot something here. I forgot page 2 of the Awesome Activator. That's important. What are some ways that I could apply those biblical truths, those bubbles around my paper, to washing dishes? Here's a few ways. Well, I could wash dishes as an act of loving service to my family. I might actually think about that ahead of time. Think about that. It could be a direct expression of my obedience to God and my love for those closest to me. I could wash dishes as an act of service to God himself. You know, I don't have to go to a foreign country to do that. I could do it as a fulfillment of his commission for me to govern over water, soap suds, cups, and plates. It's just a realization there. Well, what do I have to develop in order to do those things? Well, I have to be convinced, first of all, that dishwashing is the will of God for me, and that he wants his will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. If you don't think it's the will of God for you, talk that over with your parents and see what they have to say about that. I must be conscious of the fact that when I'm washing dishes, I'm really doing work that God wants done. That's an awesome thought. And think about that too. Talk that over with your parents. Why does God want dishes clean? Now, I have to keep in mind that I am washing the dishes as though he, Christ, were going to eat on them. Now, let's stop here for just a minute. There's a great verse in Colossians 3:23. Paul is writing to the Colossians, and he says, whatever you do, do your work heartily as unto the Lord. This is a work verse. And it's interesting because he's actually talking to slaves in that verse, and slaves don't have a lot of choice. You think you're a slave. Boy, you don't know what a slave is. Real slaves, they didn't have a choice about the work they did. Their masters just told them what to do, and they did it. Now, Paul is saying to these slaves, he says, well, look, when you work, do your work as though you're working for Christ, because he's your real employer. Look beyond your earthly master to the bigger picture here, that your real employer is Christ. Now, I think that most of you have heard this saying, WWJD, what would Jesus do? A few years ago, this was made popular, and they used to sell bracelets, and maybe they still do, that say WWJD, what would Jesus do? And that's a good thing to think about. The implication is, what would Jesus do if he were in my shoes? But let me give you a little different twist on that. Think about it this way. WWID. What would I do if Jesus was in my customer's shoes, or Jesus was in my family's shoes if I'm washing these dishes? What would I do if Jesus were coming to eat here at our next meal? How would that affect the way I work? Or for your parents that are listening, what would I do if this car that I'm working on, doing maintenance on, belong to Christ? What would I do if this, let's say you're a money manager, what would I do if this money I'm managing was his? What would I do if he was coming tonight as a guest in my home? How would that affect my house cleaning habits and those sort of things? So WWID, what would I do? Now, I must fully realize that I am loving and serving God through washing dishes. Those are all mental states that you need to bring to your mind before you wash dishes. Now, the last step is, okay, what are some action steps? Now, your action steps may be different than this, but here's just a sample. I will put a little sign near my sink that reads, "Here I directly serve God, love others, and fulfill my role of governing over the material world." That might seem silly to some people, but maybe not to others. Here's another thing. I will use my dishwashing time as a time of practical discipleship, putting my faith into action in a very real and practical way. Here's another action step. I will wash dishes regularly and consistently as unto the Lord in a timely and organized fashion. That's kind of a vision statement. Now let's get to where you can go to get these resources. Our website address is www.worldviewmatters.com. That's worldviewmatters.com. Now when you get to, hopefully you'll go a little later, and as I have a few more things to say here, but Worldview Matters, when you get to there, you want to go to the God's Pleasure at Work curriculum and the course content tab. Now, I also encourage you to take a look at the video clips that we have posted there. We have a number of them there that you can look through. These are clips from the God's Pleasure at Work curriculum. They aren't all there. We actually have 50 clips in the curriculum. I've got maybe 10 or 12 there on the website, including the Carver clip. You can look at those clips at no charge. Of course, we do encourage all of you to avail yourself of the full curriculum, God's Pleasure at Work. And that is available through the website bookstore online. You'll see a link on the website to the bookstore. If you prefer to order directly by voice, there is a toll-free number that you can use for that, 877-624-0230, 877-624-0230. The complete price of the curriculum is $35. It includes 2 books and 50 clips. Now, the curriculum, let me say, is not only fitting for students, say, age 13 and above, but also for adults. It makes a great series for a church small group study. And for you parents out there, let me just also add that I do another service. I do personal one-on-one coaching in the integration of faith and work. And it's very, very helpful for people. You can have 1 session or a dozen. It's up to you. If you want more information on that, go to firstcommission.blogspot.com. Okay. Now, here's a question I see. Where did you get your quotes from Carver? That's a great question. Actually, there are quite a few books out about Carver, but there's only 2 that I've found that specifically mention his faith. And I do recommend them. One book is called His Life. It's called George Washington Carver, His Life and Faith in His Own Words. This is a collection of letters and speeches. It's by William J. Federer, F-E-D-E-R-E-R. The other book that I found is called Fruits of Creation, and that's by John S. Farrell. That's a good question, and you're wondering, how did he have those book titles there so handy? Well, I'm at my desk here. The next question is, how can we help our kids find a good fit for a career? Does it really matter what job they pursue? That's a really good question. I would refer back to Colossians 3:23, where Paul said, whatever you do, do your work heartily as unto the Lord. Remember, that's a work verse. And it's interesting that slaves, as I said, Paul was talking to slaves, they had no choice. They couldn't take a job, fit test, and figure out what their strengths were. But we do have that privilege, and I do think it's very, very wise to get some assessments about your own strengths and abilities God has given you, and as much as possible to match those strengths with the career that you might be interested in. But no matter what career you go into, there's always going to be chores that you do, and by chores I mean it's those things that aren't particularly pleasant. I have a friend who's a job coach, and he tells me that if you have a career where 60% of your time really energizes you, he says that's very, very good. Most people don't. But I believe, as I said before, that we don't find meaning in our work. We bring meaning to our work. So no matter what career you're going to, you're always going to have jobs all along the way that may not be as fulfilling as you'd like them to be. Well, remember the slaves, okay? Do those jobs as though you're doing them for Christ. And that will bring meaning to any job you're doing, assuming it's legal work. And if it's not legal, don't be doing it. You can't do that heartily as unto the Lord, obviously. Doing your work heartily as unto the Lord, that can be done right at home. Here's the way I would translate that for young people. Make your bed as though Jesus were going to sleep in it tonight. Now that's do your work heartily as unto the Lord, translated for you. Make your bed as though Jesus were going to sleep in it tonight. Okay, so much for that. Let's see here. Can I get a copy of the 96? Yes, you can get a copy, as I said before, on our website. And once again, once you get to the website, you want to go down to the section that says God's Pleasure at Work curriculum, and then go to the course content page. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and it's been a pleasure to be with you. Don't forget that this has been recorded, and we are going to put this recording also on our own website for future reference at worldviewmatters.com, and there will be no charge for it there either, and you can listen to it anytime you want, or tell your friends that weren't with us, or if you're a student and your parent was not listening, you can invite them to do so. Thank you very much, and God bless you.